Good morning, everybody. My name is Josef van Genabith. I'm the director of the Center for Next Generation Localization in Dublin, Ireland, and I work in the School of Computing in Dublin City University. So the topic of my talk is an overview of multilingual research on language technologies in Europe. And I've got 15 minutes. So there's no chance to do this in a fair, balanced, comprehensive, and equitable way. Even though we now have almost all the data that we need to be able to do this. And the data is available in the form of the language white papers. At the last count, there were 29 of them, which we have in at the moment, and number 30 is under development and is close to be finished. We also have lots of data from some of our sister projects, like, for example, the Clarion project, and all that together gives us a good overview of the state of affairs of language technologies in Europe. What I'm going to do here, however, is I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to give a brief overview of where we are, and then I'm going to concentrate on charting a map of some of the major research challenges, and challenges are always also opportunities, that we are facing to go forward. Okay, that's the topics that I hope to review in this talk very briefly. First of all, why are language technologies important in Europe? That's pretty clear. I'm just going to sort of like set the scene very, very briefly. Then I focus on some of the challenges and opportunities, including the complexity of the subject matter, the fragmentation of the research in language technologies at the moment, on issues such as coverage, quality, robustness, the fact that we need to concentrate and be able to deal with new domains, in particular user-generated content, that we need to be able to include multiple and multimodal knowledge sources into language processing. I talked a little bit about standards and interoperability, which is closely related to affordability and scalability of language technologies. Then I'll look at one-size-fits-all versus specialized approaches to language technologies. That's sort of like a basic choice going forward. I'll look a little bit at whether we can expect a major paradigm shift within language technologies, or whether it's all engineering, kind of like a hard slog, evolutionary incremental improvements of tried and trusted technologies. And finally, a really important topic that I'm going to touch upon, and that is human user-centered language technologies, because at the end of the day, our technologies are used by people. And we don't often sort of like spend enough time on that particular issue. And then some conclusions. So setting the scene, yeah, the EU has 32 languages, 60 plus, according to some counts, about 150 regional languages. Some of them are really important regional languages. And because of that, many people have said that the language of Europe is in fact translation. And it's very, very clear how language technologies play into this. And Europe is in fact one of the world leaders in language technologies, of course together jointly with the US and Asia, with slightly different sort of like emphases, if you like. So in Europe, the focus is often on pushing and pulling information, whereas in much of language technologies in the US, there's sort of like more a focus on intelligence, on gathering information, etc. That's just a very, very rough and ready approximation. Now Europe is big, huge economic factor, huge internal market, multilingual internal market. Europe is a huge exporter and an importer of goods and services on the worldwide stage. And languages are of crucial importance in commerce and trade, but crucially, they also form part of our cultural heritage and identity, and they're important for social stability and developments. Okay, now one of the problems with human languages is that they are so incredibly complex, flexible, and varied. It's really, really hard to get machines to do well with human languages. And this poses many, many challenges to basic and applied research, but also to applications and commercial applications of language technologies. Despite this, much progress has been made, particularly in Europe, but the overall picture remains very, very patchy. And you see this if you look at the language white papers. One particular issue is coverage. There are many language technologies available for the big languages in Europe, and there are huge, massive gaps for some of the other languages, and that bears really, really big risks. A related issue is, of course, quality and robustness, and that is even the case, that's even an issue for some of the major languages. Of course, now we've got parsing technologies or speech recognition technologies, for example, that are really, really good. We have parsers that on particular domains get about 90% accuracy, but as soon as we shift domains, the picture changes. And we also would like to push that 90% accuracy into 95% accuracy, or even higher if possible, for certain applications that are mission critical. And that very easily brings us, with our current technologies, to the sort of like point of diminishing returns, where the amount of effort that we have to put in sort of like, is in no sensible relation anymore in relation to any gains in accuracy that come from this. I mentioned new domains. There's a content explosion happening, or has been happening for some time now. Much of our sort of like standard language technologies work well on professionally edited, corporate, if you like, data, text, etc. But there's now much user-generated content on the web. There's been a whole movement from the web user as a passive consumer to a producer, an active producer of content. And people have formed this word prosumer. And you find this kind of like user-generated content in social networking sites, blogs, user former, user data. And in contrast to professionally edited text, this is noisy data. But at the same time, it's of huge commercial value for customer care scenarios, sentiment analysis. You would like to know how your product is doing. If you're sort of like a big company, or if you're a hotel or a restaurant somewhere, you would like to find out about your ratings, etc. And also, of course, for social dynamics and other intelligence gathering. Another big issue is that in order to really do successful natural language processing, it helps a lot to be able to consider situated language. Language doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in isolation. It's embedded in a context. The context is linguistic as well as extra-linguistics, as well as extra-linguistic. One scenario or one example of trying to get context into a natural language processing application is, for example, if you want to do live speech recognition and translation of a lecture such as this one, it's extremely useful if you have access to, for example, the slide material that is being presented at the same time, to tune your speech recognition systems, to be able to know what the machine translation system should expect, maybe in terms of technical vocabulary, etc. And of course, it's also extremely important to generate multimodal output. We as humans, we don't just want text or just want speech. We would like to have text, pictures, videos, speech at the same time, if at all possible. I mentioned earlier on that the research scene and also the sort of like business scene in Europe to some extent is fragmented. One way of tackling fragmentation is, of course, standards and interoperability. And standards and interoperability are kind of like an indicator of maturity of a field. For example, in mechanical engineering, like in the car industry, a Toyota nut would fit a VW bolt. So you can put them together, and they're designed like that because it saves costs, it makes for scalability, etc., provides access to these technologies for mixing and sharing. And what we need in language technologies and in our research that underpins language technologies is ideally, we would like to have plug-and-play architectures, almost like a language technology application store from which different users and consumers, big companies, can pick and choose and mix and put together. And that's also crucial to supporting incremental progress, and I'll get back to that a little bit later on. And this plug-and-play technologies also has a direct impact on the affordability of language technologies. Again, both research and applications. Because this makes technologies available not just for the big players, the multinational organizations, but also for small and medium enterprises, for non-governmental organizations, and at the end of the chain, the actual users, which might be translators or users or general users of language technologies. Okay. Let me get to look at another important issue in research in language technologies, and maybe in research in general. There's a big question whether we can have sort of like a one-size-fits-all approach, or whether we should have specialized approaches. And in the area of language technologies, you can see this, for example, many languages pose special challenges. There are sort of like, complex word order languages, complex morphological languages, etc. And in order to get optimal results for some of these languages, you might have very, very specialized approaches. On the other hand, one-size-fits-all approaches are extremely attractive because they're simple, they're scalable, and scalability and simplicity often also makes things affordable. And a really good example for this kind of technology is phrase-based machine translation. It's quite simple, requires just sort of like parallel data, and then it learns from those data. There's a question about the quality. Do you get to a threshold? Do you want to get more quality? And how can you achieve this? For the specialized approaches, maybe you can get better quality. It's not always clear, but if you need to handcraft them, of course, they can be very costly, unaffordable. And there's also a big question about scalability and about sharing the division of labor across, for example, Europe to create these resources. And of course, one of the possibilities is here that unsupervised or semi-supervised machine learning methods can help us in sort of like tailoring and providing data and tools and technologies for some of these sort of like special cases. Another big issue is in research and mapping out research over the next 10 years to our 2020 agenda. In our research, do we assume that everything is sort of like engineering based on an evolutionary model of incremental improvements, or is there sort of like a next thing, a next big thing just around the corner, a big paradigm shift? Paradigm shifts do happen, and they're great, but they take time. And they're extremely, notoriously difficult to predict. Almost everybody who tried to predict paradigm shifts has been wrong. That's sort of like, the one characteristic with respect to that. Now, incremental engineering approaches, that's kind of like the hard slog. And again, we'll be in a situation where we are struggling with points of diminishing returns, where we have to look wisely at what other technologies and data and approaches we can sort of like couple with these. So that point is undecided, as is the previous one. But these are all sort of like reference points that go into the map in how we can drive best and how we can best drive language technologies within the next 10 years or less than that. Okay, and finally, I'm already getting to my final point, is that often in language technology research, the end user is forgotten. Very few of us, even in big research centers, employ any sort of like sizable complement of designers, for example, in our research, especially if it's sort of like translational research or more applied research. But it's people who are using these technological products. For example, machine translation, at the end of the day, is often used by professional translators, in addition to kind of like people browsing the web and trying to get information from a website that happens to be in another language. Now, at the moment, there's much talk in machine translation and in localization industry, in sort of like training translators into post-editing machine translation output. So machine translation is used in the localization and translation workflows, and then the human translators are supposed to sort of like post-edit the output of machine translation. But that's not very attractive to many translators. What we really like to have is interactive machine translation systems where the human is in control, where the human translator can at each and every point influence what the statistical or other machine translation system is doing in terms of sort of like editing or interfering in the process. And that means that the human is in control, and this might result in much, much better acceptance of some of the new technologies, especially in professional circles such as machine translation. And very often, I mentioned this earlier on, there is a bit of a disconnect between labs, research teams, and users, and we need to have much more human-computer interfaces research and software engineering research integrated very, very closely in language technologies. Now, summing up, there is outstanding language technology research, development, and commercial expertise in Europe, and it's assembled here in this room. We are fully competitive with the US and with Asia. Many developments happening at the moment, but in Europe, the landscape is fragmented. What we need is, because it's a big job, what we need is cross-European partnerships, industry, academia, user partnerships, and we need to work towards a shared research agenda in order to achieve this. And that's, of course, what MetaNet offers to all of us as a forum, and it's asking all of us for our input in achieving this goal. Thank you.